Hi, my name is Emmi Morton. I'm a freshman here at the University of Oregon, and I'm going to be sharing with you the research that I've done on how the link between victims and perpetrators could help us stop gun violence. Gun violence has always been around. However, in recent years, the increased media coverage of mass shootings has drawn the attention of the public towards gun usage, victims, and perpetrators. Some factors, usually regarding an individual's childhood, tend to have a stronger influence on how people may choose to use guns, particularly with perpetrators. Rooted within childhood trauma, the cycle of violence was explored by Kathy Spetz-Whittam, wherein individuals who experience victimization as a child may be more vulnerable to engage in violence throughout their life. That quote was from Wham's or Nanny in 2019. The theory essentially suggests that for those who are placed in the shoes of a victim to some sort of violence in childhood, the likelihood of engaging in violent crime when older increases. In essence, researchers have delved deeply into the background history of the individuals who have been perpetrators of gun violence. What is lacking, however, is looking at the early developmental years of victims. The trend of exposure to a violent and or traumatic event, such as gun violence, is something that increases the likelihood of becoming a victim. Further investigation during those early years of brain development could show that if there was an opportunity for an interfering factor or some type of support system, the resulting behavior could be more positive. Victims and perpetrators have a common overlapping bond, thus being a violent or traumatic event such as gun violence that occurred during the early years of brain development in childhood. Victims commonly witnessing violence and perpetrators typically being the victim of abuse, the importance of a support system is stressed and the clearest factor to possibly change this outcome. Children who are exposed to violence at a young age tend to display withdrawn behavior afterwards, leading to a higher risk of victimization. Teachers and staff from Mammoth Heights Elementary School in Parker, Colorado, were surveyed about behavioral traits and interactions with peers that students of elementary age exhibited. Most reported withdrawn behaviors, along with being very quiet and reserved, with the secondary response of observing lashing out and conduct issues from a child. The common tie, however, is that regardless of whether the child acted out or withdrew, they often struggled with friends and had little to no interest in forming meaningful relationships. Considering the perpetrators typically exhibit aggressive behaviors in youth, that research was from Aaron's Haft and 2003 and Ross and Reed in 1994. Findings from the survey suggest that witnessing violence can either result in the creation of a victim or a perpetrator. However, it's much more likely to result in the creation of a victim based on the more common withdrawn behavior and how people generally perceive withdrawn behaviors individuals as vulnerable or as an easy target. Defining withdrawn behavior clarifies why children with these traits are more likely to become victims of bullying. According to survey responses from the elementary survey, withdrawn behaviors are defined as a child who is quiet and often aloof, possibly displaying ADHD-like anxiety traits and struggles to interact and make friends with peers. Withdrawn behaviors like these increase the chances of one becoming a victim, usually unintentionally. That quote is from Detective Knight from 2021. In the past 11 years, a study done by Sylvie Mrugg and Michael Windle found that 82% of adolescents reported any exposure to violence in the last year, 79% witnessed violence, and 38% were victimized. Referring back to the survey at Mammoth Heights, 28.6 students were exposed to violence and were more likely to become victimized for bullies, whereas 71.4 students who were also exposed were not. There's a 10% difference between the elementary school survey in 2021 and the study done in 2010 by Mrugg and Windle, which included victimization, not limited just to bullying. The critical period of psychological development during these years are important to help understand how adult regression can lead to possible victimization later on without the proper help. The psychological development of an individual connects directly to regression, especially regarding the resulting behaviors from witnessing violence in youth, which can increase the chances of becoming a victim later in life. In the human brain, the limbic region is known as the part that ties cognition, emotion, and behavior together and records memories of experiences that produced positive and negative results in the past. So a person knows what threats to avoid or rewards to pursue. That result or quote is from Hammond in 2015. The limbic region is always taking information to create our background knowledge of the world. This system includes the amygdala connected to the hypothalamus, where they work together to acknowledge and identify emotions, which is the job of the amygdala, and create the proper biological response to said emotion, which is the job of the hypothalamus. The amygdala is known for its rapid development in late infancy to childhood years, which is ranging from anywhere from 2 to 12. That information is from Tottingham from 2017 and Rojas in 2018. Year 3 is one of the most critical periods of development as the brain synapses reach their peak density, which is nearly 2 times that of the adult synaptic densities are, meaning that the brain can take in more information and store it in a much deeper and more impactful way. That quote is from the Urban Child Institute. If the amygdala is damaged at any point in life, but especially in childhood years, an individual can experience issues with proper fear processing, henceforth resulting in more risk-taking behaviors and putting themselves in dangerous situations due to the lack of ability to distinguish dangerous from normal. That quote is from Guy Evan in 2021. This distorted perspective is exactly what can apply to adult victims and what needs to be considered when looking at them. Adults of any age can experience regression, but based on what we know regarding emotional development, what people experience during their childhoods will define the behaviors exhibited during regressions. Unconsciously, individuals will revert and fall back to earlier emotional or social development stages in the face of fear, anger, or insecurity. That's from Soko and Stern in 2015. Loco and Stern from 2015. Victims can typically find themselves victimized because of regression for what they witnessed as a child due to amygdala damage. People may seek out situations they knew was familiar. Damage to the amygdala can be another factor, resulting in eliciting the incorrect emotional response in a dangerous situation. For example, if an individual witnessed violence in their childhood instead of fleeing, an individual may welcome in that situation without truly realizing the danger. Similarly, in light of their experiences, children can adapt to have inaccurate perceptions or ideas about becoming a victim. That's from Wams and Nanny in 2019. That's why examples in dealing with partner violence, it was found that children who witnessed parental and marital violence in youth were much more at risk to become the victim of a partner violence, from Aaron Saft and Cohen from 2003. Detective Knight seconded this notion, explaining that people go back to what they know and what's familiar. Therefore, the concept of regression can be applied beyond exclusively partnered violence. With a newfound understanding of regression and how people tend to have a pattern in which they go back to what is known to them, this pattern applies in situations with gun violence, as well as people unconsciously seek out situations that are similar to violence that they witnessed as a child, and in turn, increase the risk of victimization. While children who are witness to violence have a higher chance of becoming a victim later on, children who are actual victims of abuse tend to exhibit aggressive and unstable moods towards others. Returning to the survey from Mammoth Heights Elementary, employees reported that students who had been abused had a significantly harder time managing their emotions, especially the ones with anger. In fact, 83% of kids who were victims of violence were more likely to become bullies, whereas only 17% were not. However, the key difference between the two is while students who are victims of abuse can also display withdrawn behavior, this result is far less common in comparison to violent behaviors. These aggressive behaviors that victims of abuse display are very important, as they not only separate how witnesses of violence and their withdrawn behavior can lead to victimization, but also how the traits of aggressive behavior, mimicry, and the cycle of violence all lead to a higher risk of perpetrating later on in life. What's learned during this period of time is critical to the child's psychosocial development, and if that child's being abused, that's what they're going to know as normal interactions between people. This relates to the idea of mimicry, which is defined as unconsciously adopting behaviors from an individual or individuals that one interacts with. The most important range of development is between 3 and 12. Thus, when a child learns through experience or even by witness that there is a significantly higher chance that that child has of repeating that behavior. If a negative behavior is repeated by someone a child idolizes, the chances of that child replicating the behavior are higher. If this is true, then if a child is threatened with a gun directly, the child may end up repeating that behavior or seriously injuring or killing someone. The biggest thing researchers today haven't explored is how an intervention of children who've either witnessed or been the victim of abuse can drastically change the path for that child from either being a victim or a perpetrator to have a fair chance at leading a normal life. And as an adaptation due to the trauma, a child may grow up with inaccurate perceptions regarding the chances of becoming a victim, as well as aggression-based biases. This research is from Ramser Nanny in 2019. Detective Knight of the Aurora Police Department in Aurora, Colorado, stresses the importance of a support system, whether it be friends, family, a religion, sport, therapy, social outreach program, or even programs offered at school. During an interview, he talked about how when a child is lacking that support system, that child is much more likely to end up taking the wrong path and find themselves in trouble. Support systems are vital to correcting behavior and just generally encourages a better path for individuals with childhood trauma. If caught early enough, some negative behaviors can be unlearned and to a certain degree healed. When a handful of survivors of childhood trauma, whether it be witnessed or victims of abuse, the biggest split in the path is whether or not a support system was present. However, if it wasn't, witnesses have an increased chance of victimization, whereas victims of abuse has an increased chance of perpetration. If the path can be changed for an entire generation by offering support, gun violence should decrease drastically, with lesser production of victims and perpetrators in adulthood. An individual course of life is never certain, even with support, they can still go down the wrong path with an abundance of poor decisions. But with the presence of a support system, the chance decreases significantly. Gun violence is the most common form of homicide in the US, and its rate is on a steady incline. Naturally, the amount of perpetrators goes up to commit the crime, and the number of victims and casualties increase. Looking at adulthood and victims of perpetrators of gun violence in the modern world, the common link is that each had a form of gun violence or some sort of violence in their childhood. If studied from childhood to adulthood, both witnesses and abuse victims, the general trend provided by the evidence in this essay is hypothesis to be the witnesses of a violence have a slightly increased chance of becoming a victim of gun violence, and abuse victims have a significantly higher chance of becoming a perpetrator of gun violence. However, with the influence of support system, the child's path can be changed from the root, and both perpetrators and victims can be decreased. The caveat is we must start now with today's newest generation in order to make a lasting impact and offer support to witnesses and victims that we do know of. It's as simple as lending a helping hand to the people around us that need it. And it's a step we need to take now. Thank you. Here are my works cited. And thank you for taking your time to listen.